Welcome everybody to Mentor Time. Today's topic is one that I talk about frequently to people that reach out to work with me, that join the course, and in other ways such as networking. People, you don't want to undersell yourself. You want to stand in your brilliance. As always, we start with the takeaway. Today's takeaway is claim your credit and then you will stand in your brilliance. And then others will echo your brilliance. So just briefly in the chat, I just want to know, 1, 2, or 3, how confident do you feel about describing your results? Now, I know many of you on here, and I know you're saying, but it depends, Sue, if I'm with peers or if I'm with someone new, and it depends if I'm here with you. And just give me a 1, 2, or 3. I've got some 3s. That's good. 2.5. Love that. Yes. All right. And 2.6 and a 2. I love working with people that know about stats. They're like, oh, I give her something in between. But I love that it edges more towards the 3 than the 2. Thanks to everybody who gave me the fun laugh. Here's what I hear from people. These things happen to me all the time in terms of what I hear. I hear people say, Sue, I'm too junior and I have no real experience. And I didn't mean you're as junior as this person who's actually waiting for a school bus. But you all tell me that's very hard for you. You're a student, maybe a student in your Master's of Public Health. You might be an undergrad focusing on bioethics. You still think that you haven't done this. And yet I know that you have experience. Other people tell me very frequently, Sue, I'm not always able to share in having my name on something. A lot of times I do work for a client. We had that situation quite often in the federal government. It happens in the state government here in Maryland. And so you become very anonymous for your expert help because you're not listed anywhere except maybe in an acknowledgement sometimes. And I'm hearing from a lot of women as they're getting more senior. One day they're the shining star, and then suddenly the next day faded light. And it's not just women. I have a couple men friends who've reached out to tell me that they were hoping to retire soon because they were feeling like that was already coming. So these are constant areas that help me underscore for you all the opportunities you have in these phases to be able to talk about yourself without feeling braggy. I've said this for several years. There's a couple mentor times on it. It's not bragging, it's a fact. All right, how are we going to get there? First, we're going to talk about why we undersell ourselves, and then going to show you ways for you to think about, excuse me, standing in your brilliance. And as always, for the new members today, we end with what should you do? I give you actionable work that you can take forward if you want to do something about it. All right, let's start with why do we undersell ourselves? It's interesting to me that people always know where they want to go. Almost no one contacts me and says, I don't even know what I'm doing. That doesn't happen right now, even with the bad job market. People know they want a job. They want to practice public health. They want to use their epidemiology. They want to go back to interior designing. I'm getting a lot of people wanting to try out pivots. And they also tell me that they are drowning in advice, not just online, where there's more than Ron and I could ever have hoped for 10 years ago, when we were still writing things because that was the only way to reach people was written products. But also in person. They're getting advice from their father's friend. They're getting advice from their old nanny. They're getting advice from their coach at high school, whatever it is. You're getting a lot of information. The problem I realized and deciphered is that people don't always know their own value. And by know, acknowledge it, feel comfortable with it, or maybe don't even know. So the advice that happens for you for the career advice online, it assumes these things. It assumes you can clearly articulate what you bring to the table. It assumes that you're comfortable talking about your achievements. And it assumes that you have confidence. And it's been interesting as I've looked at this, because I've been talking a lot lately about self-advocacy, to sell yourself, to stand in your brilliance. And is that part of confidence? Yes. Is confidence part of it? Yes, in a way. But when I went to look at it, it's the self-advocacy of us doing the activities that get us known and noticed, that help us put our thought expertise out there. And so what did I do? I went to my Google Lit review and looked for scales for self-advocacy. And the first one came up with these 7 questions, and there was a referee journal article about what related to what, and took me back to my advanced stats work for my doctorate, which I didn't want to remember. But the questions are all, I can do this, not I do this. So I thought, okay. Then I found one that was listed as self-advocacy, but it was called the self-esteem test. And this is only 1 page of 2.5, another page and a half. It is long, long. And it's generally, I am this, I feel this. And again, for me, it was measuring a lot of things that I don't think help people move. This is useful for certain kinds of coaches that work on life coaching or getting people unstuck. But in terms of what I'm looking for in self-advocacy, I thought, oh, okay, this one also came up under self-advocacy, and this was self-confidence. It originally started for high schoolers, I believe they first did it in, and then talked about it being representative for adults too. But it's 14 questions. It probably helps. It's got a 5-point Likert scale kind of thing. I'm not sure that the questions are that helpful, because they don't reinforce the positive actions of what I consider self-advocacy, which is, I know how to do this and I'm taking it forward to do it. And then I found a website that has 50 different surveys. And I finally got to one that was they're all related, but they were all measuring other kinds of things. And this was called the Professional Confidence Level Questions. These are questions you could take. And these, again, didn't help me get to action. So, of course, I had to develop a framework. I decided I would call this the continuum of underselling, or the continuum of don'ts. People don't value the experience they already have. Either they don't know how to do it, they don't know that it's relevant. The data is certainly experience for you, or they have been told that it doesn't value. For example, I get a lot of people in graduate school saying, I was told that group projects don't count. And they don't always count, but sometimes they do. The second is that they don't take ownership of it. And we'll be talking about all of these more, but it's you don't say it or show it because it's become your norm, or you are the person that is in an org where they say, oh, we don't really talk about our accomplishments. That's the senior manager's role. I haven't heard that for a while, but it used to happen. But it's also those people who tell me, Sue, my cultures, the place I was raised, the family I was raised in, I need to be humble, I can't brag, I need to be less than the senior people I work with. And finally, the last one is something all of you have heard me say multiple times. You don't talk to the other side of the conversation. You're not phrasing it in a way that they can hear it. All right, I've told you all of the don'ts of underselling, why people undersell themselves because of what they don't do. So we're going to see many things similar to what we just talked about, but on what do you do? So how do you do this? I guess I left the 2 in there. Just in the chat, let me know. How often do you think you undersell yourself? Is it all the time? Frequently, once in a while, never? I'm willing to take any kinds of things you want to tell me about how often you think you undersell yourself. Because I can envision that for all of us, there are times where we do it, depending on who we're talking to. Once in a while, thank you, once in a while, okay. Somewhere between once in a while and frequently. Okay. Oh, I like that. Okay, good. Nice to know. I'm not saying great, you undersell yourself. I like that you're, as I recall, your other answer was in the middle of the Likert scale too. So I don't mind if you hedge your bets. All right. Depends on group or team project. And yeah, the things, those are more difficult for sure. And oh, welcome, Priscilla. Not sure. And that's fine. You don't always have to be aware of it. You probably are not doing much of it. I just wanted to know if one time in your recent memory you thought, oh, I really could have been better at conveying what I've done. So these are more of the kinds of statements that come from the I'm inexperienced or I don't know what my experience is. When you say I feel inexperienced, it's in comparison to something. They're comparing themselves either to other graduate students, new emerging professionals, even very senior professionals. I'm getting it now with the women I told you. I get women who are very senior who are coming saying, I don't feel like I'm being recognized for the value I bring. Sometimes they maybe aren't bringing the value. The second statement is more along what I call hidden evidence. Those are the people that don't know how to value the evidence that they have. They don't know that something that they did could be counted as experience, whether it's leadership in a volunteer membership club for a year, which is definitely experience. It could be writing articles and blogs for your membership organization, and those are real experiences. So this won't surprise you. As you value the experience that you have, the first thing is you need to identify your evidence. And those who are new with me know I don't know yet, but I talk always about making sure you have your evidence-based results. But also, I have talked for many years, and there's a presentation that I did a few weeks ago on this. You need to also, in valuing yourself and your experience, is to talk out loud. Usually it's with a colleague, it may be with friends. It's usually not with your parents because your evidence and the experience that comes out of your mouth differently from the back chatter back here is what I call verbal self-reflection. You say something or someone represents back to you what they heard you say, and you think, oh, yes, that really was something that I could take credit for, and I should take credit for it. This was the second one on my work has to be anonymous. And by anonymous, I don't just mean when you can't, as a federal government contractor, there were times we could almost always say that we were doing work, but we couldn't necessarily, our names were not included in any reports on it. So these would be statements like, the team I was on did X and Y. And I get this a lot from junior emerging professionals who are looking at what they've done, and they're always feeling like I'm junior member of the team. I don't know. And I know they do a lot more than I don't know, but they would say the team did it. All of you need to think about how you phrase things in meetings, in interactions, so that you're not cutting off your foot. I don't even know what the metaphor is or the analogy is. You should not start with something like, maybe this isn't the right solution, but, and give something that's probably brilliant, because you use that minimizing language so that you don't disappoint anybody and you're already disappointing yourself. The similar phrase that I emphasize a lot on is those of you, and it must be being taught in grad school. That's the only thing I can think of, because people are still writing with what I call the caveat clauses. As the formal administrator for the blah, 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 School of Public Health, blah, 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 university, and then the brilliance is lost because you've got 5 or 6 words that distract people. Okay, her role is this, and now start with you. In your work, in what you do, you should represent yourself first with you as the subject, and we'll talk more about this. The caveat clauses can also be like we always saw in research, at least I did going to grad school, despite the limitations of this study, and then something wonderful, instead of leading with the wonderful first. And there are still organizations, and globally there are structural hierarchies. That was hard to say. Structural hierarchies in organizations that things only get transmitted by certain people, and it's usually more senior staff. And we have had people on mentor time, and I've worked with people who say, Sue, I'm not able to talk about how I contributed to that. My boss took the information and presented it as if he had done all the work, or just not even acknowledging that person's work. And I get that over and over again. So the way you can take ownership is go to the OATS formula, OATS, and get comfortable with phrasing your results in the contributions to the larger goals of the organization, the division, the activity, the membership club. And similarly, you can practice and use those in dialogues and discussions so that you're stating your perspectives with confidence and owning your results. It may not fit, it may not feel comfortable initially doing it. And it's not the like testifying for a court where you'd have to say, I'm the expert in program evaluation and blah, 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 blah. You're not going to do that. None of you are. I know you all. But you need to start with yourself as the lead. I did this, I did that, I bring this, however we're phrasing it for the situation. And the shining star to faded light is more of the area of not fitting in, of finding that the culture doesn't work, of feeling ageism. I was reminded yesterday from someone I checked in with, hadn't talked to her in 3 years. And she said, I still think of you talking about how you were going to retire on your own terms. And I early retired for a variety of reasons, but I could see that things were changing. But part of what we get as we get older is it's very hard to resist not saying to people, this is the way we do it, this is the way the client likes it. Because in the last 2 years with COVID and all of the changes in job situation, but also with companies trying to manage with supply chain issues, with AI coming on strong, we always did it this way isn't going to get airplay. And the people who are trying to preserve their niche area where they have had a lot of work and have been the experts, but now that's not being funded so much anymore, and they may be in a transition. But that doesn't mean that they can't get somewhere. You all need to make a habit of communicating results, and you probably are, because I don't see you every day on these. 2 things. Talk in the language the other side understands. So the person whose work is no longer being funded, but it's still needed, has the opportunity on LinkedIn, Substack blogs, on Discord channels to provide all of her senior level, very global expertise out there without the expectation of funding, but funding may come. So you can help yourself by making sure that you are putting out your thought leadership, if you like that term, your expertise, and also the contributions that you make and bring. And part of self-advocacy is indeed building up confidence, but it comes from the knowledge that you're helping people understand what you do and the ways in which you can contribute. That's why I use the word knowledge there. And also habituation. I tried to find a shorter word for that. But it's basically, as you say it over and over again, just like your 90-second intro speech to tell me about yourself, it will become more comfortable for you to move from being a faded light back to being a shining star. It may be just a different star from the big bright one we see here. All right, what should you do? If you're going to increase your self-advocacy, I want you to think about what do you need to or want to work on. And I'm going to go over the 3 areas again really quickly for you. Value the experience you already have. Most of you have dug deep already into your experience, but don't forget you're gaining experience every day. So remember to bring that forward. And if you're getting stuck or if it's a transition time, don't be afraid to ask someone, including me and Ron, I'm sure, to have a session with you where you can use the verbal discussion to help you move beyond the way you've described results. I just got something from a person who couldn't attend the co-working event we had last week for updating resumes, asking, could I look at the efforts she'd made toward this? And I thought, this is the kind of thing you need to do. Ask for help if it's useful. The second area is taking ownership. So even though your work was anonymous, as long as you can say that you did the work, you can still attribute that to a higher level contribution, and you will be able to also have evidence-based results. There's a little bit in this of fake it till you make it. I don't like that phrase. I like taking on role realignment, taking on a different role. And so stating your perspectives with confidence so that your discussions and your dialogues reflect well the opportunities you've had and how you've contributed, because your boss is probably supervising several people, and even he or she can't keep everything in their minds about the great things you've done. So don't be afraid to take ownership. And making a habit is not just talking to the other side of the convo, but I think we forget. Every 6 months, you should be refreshing and revising your business niche, whether it's a technical area that you're getting better in, whether you've added on a new technical area, whether you've got more leadership or management experience. So I'd love to know in the chat box which area you would like to be working on, if you're willing to share it. Thanks for the person who said, the first time I've thought of my communications in terms of underselling myself. That's great to know. And I'll answer the question at the end. I will focus on valuing experience as I already have and habituated communicating results. That's great. Thank you. I want to work more on habituating communication, and so does someone else. That's great, because that's the area that will help you feel most confident. Thank you for the comment. It's helpful on knowing how to phrase as contributions. Yes, yes. Everybody wants to work on habituating their communicating results and opportunities. So I will just move on now to remind you of the takeaway. Claim your credit. That's what this is all about, so you don't undersell yourself. Then you can stand in brilliance. Then you'll feel comfortable, because brilliance is radiating from you, but also light shining on you. That's my sort of made up of what I think of as brilliance. I also like the way the British use it. They say that's just brilliant when they mean that's great, which I think sounds nicer. But don't forget, as you get this confidence, as you talk in a way that the other side of the convo can hear it, but not minimizing your results, people will start to echo that as well. Ron, comments, thoughts, please?
Yeah, I get 2 ideas actually as I was listening. One of them I couldn't help but thinking is the idea that I'm a fraud, or the notion that somehow it's a failing of ourselves, that we stand next to somebody else and somehow we do this comparison, and so I'm actually a fraud. So it's this idea of the imposter. I'm really an imposter, and I think that's part of the challenge that this is actually talking against. In other words, that's the thing that's dragging us down, is this idea that I think I'm an imposter. And then the other side of it was, as I was listening, it was reminded of my military experience, because as I've mentioned to other people on other occasions, is I was one of those individuals who contributed significantly to the work that other people took the credit for. And it's not so much that they take the credit for, it's just the way the structure is built. The military is terribly structure bound. And so it's very difficult. And then there are some organizations that are that way, and government, and even some businesses are like that. Is that you represent the company, you represent the CEO, whatever. And so that's ultimately what you're doing. And so what I was thinking is every once in a while, certainly in the military, you get an opportunity to sit down with your boss for a performance review. And so what I'm hearing in part, or what I was reminded of in part, is why can't we do a performance review with ourselves? If I were my boss, it sounds silly, but if I were my boss and I looked at what I was doing, if I'm contributing in any way, shape, or form to the organization, and you better be, otherwise you should be fired, but you are contributing in very meaningful ways. So give yourself a quarterly review of your performance. Better yet, ask your boss to say, hey, how are things going? What could I change, etc. And there's actually an opportunity to investigate how you are seen by your own organization so that you can help create language around what your accomplishments are, how they're valued. And ultimately, that's what it is. We're talking about valuing our own accomplishments. Sometimes we don't recognize them. Maybe it's because we think we're just a cog in the wheel. Yeah, you're just a cog in a big wheel. We all are just cogs in a wheel. But in the end, if you weren't that person, somebody else would be doing the job, yes. But because you bring in a particular perspective, all your experiences, all your successes, your failures, all of those things come to that point in time when something important needs to be done, and you're contributing to that important thing. And that's the pressure point that you bring your entire set of experiences to that place. And so you are bringing that uniqueness that you have to offer. And that's what my takeaway from all of this is, to really understand that you're there for a purpose, you're there for a particular reason. Otherwise, you'd be fired, and you're not. And so they want you there, and you are a contributing member. And just dig that out, because from time to time, you need to assess it for yourself. And then Sue says, perhaps you need someone else to help reflect with you. So anyway, just some thoughts.
Oh, no, that was great. I love to not know that. No, we've got to stop using no as an interjection when we don't mean that. Anyway, no grammar lessons today. I think what was important also, though, is you alluded to the performance reviews, which are notoriously, in the last 30 years, doing a self-assessment for your boss. And it's really hard, especially if you're new to the job, even if you're senior, to know exactly what their style is, what they want. It's always agony for people. But I'm still convinced that it's very hard to take self-assessment out of your brain and write it without doing some verbalizing. And with the boss, having the performance review certainly will be verbal, but you'd like to get that out before so you could understand better. And that includes everything from how you phrase your results to whether or not he ends up seeing your performance the same way, which is something you can't anticipate unless you know that you're on a performance improvement plan. I'm going to open the floor for questions or comments on this now, and then I'll answer Chelsea's question about work crossing multiple fields. Anybody? Okay, that's fine. I can envision that I know you're accomplished by yourselves. Let me read Chelsea's question and then give you an answer, and I think others may have some contributions. What if one's work crossed multiple fields or industries? For example, a conference presentation from research work is considered an accomplished result in the public health profession. However, it's considered only an intermediary step to final publication of a journal article in academic research. I always tread carefully between the two, but sometimes it's difficult when the same result is not interpreted and valued the same way depending on the audience. Yeah, I can imagine that's difficult. And not only that, even in academia, which actually should be celebrating a conference presentation nowadays, I know they don't always. what I would say for you and others, if you're working in that way, is to not ever, don't minimize what you did just because one side doesn't value it. Because the way that we, number one, sort of field test how we say things helps us understand better what we're writing. Today, for me, this past weekend, as I was working on this, I started looking at the book I'm writing, and I'm talking about self-advocacy, and it's gotten me better focused on that. There is, about 20 years ago, London School of Hygiene and Trop Med started a big, huge newsletter on disseminating results of research to various audiences. And I thought, hooray! And they were like the leaders in it. Because academics usually just stayed in their old little corner, wrote their abstracts, went to conferences, talked to their friends, colleagues on the phone, and it was that or nothing. And so what do you need for tenure? You need 5 refereed journal articles. You need to be sought after as a keynote, whatever academia wants nowadays. Your work with them does not have to follow that same pathway. So if you're in a job working directly, say for an academic department, the Department of Epi, your work, if you are, for example, say you're the deputy PI on something, your work still can be seated in a tiered approach to how results build. If you think about a logic model, our logic model says we do this to get this outcome, or we have this outcome, this is how we get there if we want to go backwards. Either way, the we do this has tons of different implementation steps in it. And I would say that if you're working, say you're working part-time or you're seconded part-time to this academic department and the rest of it's in the state health department, for some reason they need your expertise, that's great. You just have to write to and talk to the audience, just like you would not say the same thing to a community meeting who filled in your survey on vaccine compliance that you would say to a researcher who's investigating it. So I think that it's more a question of your confidence of being able to navigate those two crosses. And if you said multiple industries, that's just one example. That's a very, in a way, very easy example. It's not so easy. This is what I thought maybe you were going for initially was, what if I work in 2 different divisions and I have 2 different supervisors and I'm doing 50% time in each, and one thinks I'm doing a great job and the other doesn't? Those things exist too. So it's your challenge to phrase things for the person that needs to receive them. But it's also that situation I gave you is one of those no-win situations because there's no 50% jobs. You're either a 10 or 20% job or 100% job. Everybody that I ever used part-time was always coming to me saying, oh, my other boss says I have to do this and I'm not available, Sue, because her other boss was her longer-term boss. They came to me when they needed additional funding and I had work to do. And so I hope that helps. Let me know if you want to add a little bit more to that. I don't want to go on a huge amount of time. Ron, did you want to say something? I'm sorry, I just noticed you're unmuted.
Yeah, no, it just reminded me actually, just some things that you said there. It reminded me, and I may have shared this before, is when I was doing my thesis defense. And my thesis, the one question that came from, I don't think it was my thesis advisor, but it was a member of the panel, and says, you're in the military, and did this subject that you're talking about is a military subject. Would you have presented this to the military? My answer was no, because the language was all wrong and they wouldn't understand a darn thing that I was saying. And so I told them, I said, while it's about the military, I wrote it for you. If I had to write it for them, I would have written it very differently and you wouldn't have accepted it. It was that simple. And it had to do with exactly the kinds of things that you and I talk about often, is that the military is very much interested in, okay, so now what can I do with that content that you've just supplied? And that's not necessarily the theory and the examination of theory and whatever was a requirement for a thesis. And so you get that kind of interesting play. And so jobs can be like that. I think just like you said, is that one, one of the recipients of this content wants to hear it a completely different language. And so that becomes a real challenge. And I don't, sometimes I guess it means it's actually two papers or two presentations or two something. But anyway, just a thought.
Chelsea, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, Sue and Ron, I think they like all the advice has been really helpful. I think for me, like that's one of the challenges, like depending on the audience, what can I say and how should I frame it? And then the other part is what if I can only develop one document that's going to be reviewed by two different audiences? Because I sometimes have job applications and my reference would be from someone with a stronger academic background. And sometimes I get criticized for the way I describe my research results, but then it's in a way that's commonly accepted in the type of jobs I'm applying for. So that's where it's a little bit tricky, but yeah, it's hard to gain confidence in those spots. And I don't know if there's a better way to do it, but it's just helpful to just hear your advice and maybe just not change anything at this point.
Yeah, I think if I'm envisioning a study where I don't know why public health would present on it, and then the academic department would write the journal article, but let's say that's exactly what happened, and maybe that's what you're talking about. That the academic department will have already presented something that is either more medical or all biostats or something that we all learned in school we don't love to have to deal with in a conference necessarily. But that doesn't mean that you cannot. Now I'm jumping, thinking it sounded like you were saying, and the person who served as a reference for me wasn't necessarily aware of my research capabilities because I had to write it for a different audience that was very much more plain language and getting to the implementation issues, not the, isn't it this nice piece of research? We've tied it up with a bow and said, now we need more research. I'm being the old academic of that's where everything always led to. I know they try not to do that nowadays because their funding also has to have some use. But does that help you think about it more? And if that's the case, I want to give you some thoughts about how you ask for a reference letter.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful. And it's like the way I would frame my research results for a public health, like someone who's more of a public health professional, is going to sound different to someone who's an academic researcher. But then that academic researcher is actually my reference.
Yeah.
And so, like, I would get some comments sometimes from my reference.
I have often and have a form that I use when people want me to write a reference for just this reason. And it's not that I can't write a reference for someone from scratch, but we all do better with a page that is not blank, number one. And number two, I can't tell you the number of people I've worked with who are waiting months for an academic advisor or a reference to get out when the job is like internships and stuff. If you follow what I ask people to give me, which is all the background, what's the job, why the job, what do you want me to emphasize, but also in what do you want me to emphasize, what is it that you need that person to know? If you're writing to your academic advisor, you would say, I know this doesn't necessarily represent the research skills that I apply in my experience with you, but this job requires people who know how to write program reports every year, people who know how to write briefing materials for a Ministry of Health official, not the statistical office that monitors the surveillance in the country. So that, and I'm happy to send you and anybody else. I think I did something on this. I think I did asking for help a while ago. I'll have to go back and look at it, but I'm happy to share. It's a Google form that I've got, or a sheet. I think I did it in Sheets that says exactly that. And that way, when you ask someone to be your referee, it's already filled in for them, so they see they don't have to do any work. I always tell people, you should be drafting the referee's letter. And someone said to me once, why? That means that they're going to write. And I said, look, when someone sends me things, and I have friends that have been on this call that you all know well, I don't agree to write it exactly what they say. I modify it and I send them a copy of it so they know. So if they said, I think someone wrote, I'm very excited to recommend so, and I would never write that. It's not that I'm not happy to do it, but I don't say I'm very excited. And I'm always careful to state it in the context of the work. But I can't do that if you don't point to me, because I don't have time to read your job posting and your resume. These are my little pieces of paper. I don't have a big one. And I don't have time to do that. If you want me to write the letter, make it efficient. And then that might help your referee, the person who's going to write these references. He or she will feel better and more included by your explanation, and you might not get so many comments. So I will stop there. Tao.
Yeah, I just want to briefly share that I was in a very similar situation where I was applying for a health admin fellowship, and my references were from an academic background. Like wet lab has nothing to do with health admin, but so all of them, I think all of the three references ended up, or I offer first, is it helpful if I draft the letter for you? Because to save you time basically, and also to make sure that the letter is actually relevant to what I'm applying for, because the background is not totally aligning. And they all said, yes, oh, go ahead. And then they saw the draft and they edited a few things, but overall, normally the references would be really happy if the draft comes to them ready and they just need to do a little bit of work tweaking here and there. So yeah, that's my experiences with the two different worlds. Yeah.
That's really helpful, Tao. Thank you so much for sharing that. That's great. All right. Any last comments? Okay, I don't hear anybody else. Then I will ask Ron to, there are just a few references if you want to see any of those scales. And Ron, if you will close the meeting for us, please.
Yes, thank you everyone for a lively discussion, and thanks Sue for a great presentation. It was very interesting, and I look forward to getting together again. I think we're getting together in 2 weeks' time.
No,
And,
I actually changed that. I've got to send out a message tomorrow.
Okay.
I've changed the schedule. We'll do 2 weeks actually next week. Yeah.
Okay. And then also, if you're interested, there's open office hours later this week. So
Right.
that
Thank
might
you.
be something of
forgot.
interest. Okay.
Yeah, I have to get that message out because I need to remind people it's open office
Yeah.
hours again. All right, great. So we'll see you all next week or whenever we see you. And Tao, you're on the list and hope to see you back. It's great to see all of you today. I always enjoyed catching up with you all.